I brought this shadow box in this morning to talk about invitations. Most people send out invitations nowadays for important events, to see who's going to come, to get word out about what's going to be happening. They want to announce what's going to be happening. And this is something my beautiful wife Beth put together. It has our wedding invitation in here. A shadow box. So that's a pretty important day, right? That you want to celebrate, you want to get people to come to. So I remember us putting together the invitations, and we had these. She had this little wax stuff that we melted, and that then we sealed the envelopes with a little F stamp for 4th grade, right? And we sent them out to all our family and friends, and many of you were here, and we got married June 26, 2004, here in this sanctuary. Some of you were here. Important events like that call for an invitation to be sent out. I found an account of another woman named Julie Potter who said that she spent some time like that with her mother putting together invitations for their wedding. They spent 2 whole nights personally writing out the addresses to all the people that they were going to invite. And then at the end of the note, they write a personal message and said, please come to the dinner following the ceremony. You're invited to come to that. Please come and participate. Please stay for the dinner following the ceremony. But when Julie got back, she realized that she had forgotten to send one of the most important invitations to her own parents. She forgot to invite her parents. And so she sat down and wrote out the invitation, but on the end of their note, or to their invitation, she said, please pay for the dinner following the ceremony. Please stay, of course, but please pay for the dinner following the ceremony. I don't know if they did or not, but that was her note. That was her note. A wedding's definitely one of those important events, isn't it? Where we send out invitations. We want people to know about it. We get word out to everybody we want to be there, to invite them to it. It is an important day, right? A couple is making a lifelong commitment to one another. A man and a woman stand there in the presence of God and many witnesses, and it's a wonderful celebration to be invited to. Well, several months ago in February, we talked about the invitation that God sends out to be part of the wedding banquet of the Son in Matthew 22. That was an important invitation, and we're going to look at another invitation today, going back several chapters in Matthew 11 to what has been called one of the most gracious invitations in all the New Testament. One of the most gracious invitations. Our text today is Matthew 11, verses 25 through 30. But before we read the invitation, we probably need to acknowledge that invitations have to be accepted. We can receive all kinds of invitations, but we either accept them or we decline them. What will we do with Jesus' invitation? Matthew 11, verses 25 through 30. This is the word of the Lord. At that time, Jesus said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent and have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone whom the Son chooses to reveal him. And here's the invitation. Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. The word of the Lord. Whenever we receive an invitation like this one for our wedding, it usually indicates who's doing the inviting, right? On this invitation, it says, Richard and Shirley Snavely and Philip and Maureen Forgrave invite you to share in the joy of the marriage, uniting their children, Elizabeth Aaron and Philip Eric. Usually when you get an invitation, it's from someone, right? You receive it from someone or an organization or whatever. And this invitation is from Jesus That's the someone. And importantly, much of Matthew 11 is depicting or clarifying who Jesus is. Who is this that we're receiving this invitation from? Who is Jesus? Jesus is the one extending it, but who is Jesus? If you look at the beginning of the chapter, and I would even invite you, if you have your Bibles, to turn back there and look at what's said about Jesus. Jesus is approached by John's disciples, and John's disciples ask, are you the one who is to come, or are we to expect another? They're beginning to answer this question, well, who is Jesus? And Jesus says, go tell John what you see and hear. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. What he's doing there is he's picking up on prophecies like Isaiah 35, 5 and 6, Isaiah 61, and he's saying he's fulfilled those things, that he is the Messiah. He is the one who is to come that they're waiting for. He's affirming that for John. He's the Messiah. But then, in the portion we've already read this morning, look at verses 25 through 27. Jesus speaks about his relationship with the Father, and he begins to answer that as well. Well, who is this invitation from? Look at what he says about himself. Jesus is addressing the Father in prayer, just as he taught us to pray, our Father in heaven. But his sonship is unique because look at what he says. He says, no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son. Jesus reveals the Father. I thought of John 1:18. It is God, the only Son, who's close to the Father's heart, who has made him known. And not just in part, but fully known. So part of the answer to that question, who is this invitation from? This is from the Son of God, the one who reveals the Father. That's who this invitation is from. And then, of course, later in Matthew 16, in the same way, the Father also reveals the Son. Craig Keener says, Jesus alone is in a unique position to declare exactly what God is like. That's the one that we are receiving this invitation from. The one who shows and reveals and teaches us about who and what God is like. So this invitation that we find in verses 28 through 30 is of supreme importance because of who it's from. This is from Jesus, the Son of God. So this is even more important than a wedding invitation, right? Even more important than our wedding invitation, as important as that might be, right? This invitation is from Jesus, so it's even more important than that. Here's another way I would put it. I collected some of the junk mail we received at the church in Parsonage this week. This is just some of it, right? This is just some of it. Look at all the invitations we receive through the mail each week. And what do we do with them? Pitch that. Look at some of these. All these invitations to buy this or that. All these invitations to sign up for this or that service. Shopify, I don't even know what that is. Throw that away. Some kind of roofing place. Another roofing place. I think they think we need a new roof. Some kind of, I don't even know what this is. Business, go 1 gig internet for $100. All these invitations, and what we do with this kind of stuff, we rip it up and throw it away. We rip it up and throw it away. In other words, Jesus' invitation isn't like those kind of throwaway things that we just get in the mail and throw away them quickly. This invitation is more important than any kind of junk mail we receive. Even the best invitation we could think of, it's more important than that because this invitation is from Jesus, the Son of God who reveals the Father. Think about that. You and I are receiving an invitation from God. That's why it's so important. That's why it's so important. But someone might say, well, that invitation isn't for me. That sounds like too important of an invitation. I mean, who is this invitation really being extended to? It's probably not for me because I'm not a very important person. I went to the dentist this last week, and my dentist said something that will help us with this. He talked about, well, he was disappointed that he didn't receive an invitation to the NFL draft to be behind the scenes. He wondered why he wasn't invited. he was talking about, well, that's really an invitation for the VIPs, for the players that will likely be taken in the first round, and their agents and their families. That's reserved for those people, but I'm just a commoner. I'm just a dentist from Belton. Why would I be invited? You see, what makes this invitation from Jesus so gracious is it's because of to whom it is being extended to. It's not just for the powerful and the rich. It's not just for those who might be deemed important by someone else. No, look at who Jesus is extending this invitation to. To all who are weary and heavy laden. To us. All of us. We are being extended this invitation from Jesus. That's what makes it so gracious. Jesus extends this to us. Now, Jesus doesn't use the phrase take heart, but he does use the phrase all who are weary. That's the second part of our theme here for this sermon series. But it does carry the essence of what he means by take heart in the other instances that we've been looking at. Take heart, remember, means be encouraged. It means to be of good cheer. And I've told you that we've been learning that these are all commands in the New Testament. And these instances that we've been looking at, that either Jesus speaks this or somebody else speaks it because of something Jesus says, they're all commands. Think about that. It's not a suggestion. It's not take it or leave it. This is an invitation that Jesus really wants us to receive. Take heart. It's not unwarranted, trite advice. It's based on this reality of truth that Jesus announces and the fact that it's the Lord who speaks it. So even though he doesn't use the words here, in this case, I can try to phrase it this way. Jesus, since it's him who extends this invitation, all those who are weary and heavy laden should receive this invitation to take heart. To accept his invitation. Should take heart and accept it. Jesus' invitation is to all who are weary. Weary is what we think it means. Tired, exhausted, worn out by toil and burdens and grief. Maybe some of you feel that way this morning. Worn out. The story behind the song Worn by 10th Avenue North is an example of those who are weary. Mike Donahue is their lead singer, or was when the band was still a band of 10th Avenue North. And one day he came into the room where there was other songwriters gathered. They were there, they were going to write a song together. They were having a session, and he came in and just announced to them, we're going to write a song today called Worn, in terms of like worn out. We're going to write a song called Worn today. And he explained some of the circumstances or the story behind why they wrote that song. He shared with them and shared in an interview about the song that it was based on some of what was happening in his life with his wife especially. His wife had just had their second child a couple of months before. And like most days before he left the house, she grabbed his arm that day and said, I'm so worn out. He was tired too, but she was really worn out, and he wanted so much for her to just feel human again. Their baby wasn't sleeping through the night. They weren't getting any sleep, and that's par for the course when you have an infant like that. But perhaps for other reasons this morning, you can identify with her plea to her husband, or this statement to her husband, I'm just so worn out. Probably not for the same reason, but you can identify, Lord, I'm just so tired. I'm just so exhausted. I can't put one foot in front of the other. I'm worn out. He also shared part of something else that was going on in their life that tied into this whole weariness that they were experiencing. They had a friend that they were that they were having trouble with, who had taken offense to something that he had said, and they didn't even know all that was happening or why he was so upset. It was a misunderstanding. And even though Mike tried to apologize and tried to work things out, the friend at that time wasn't willing to take any steps to reconcile. So they were dealing with this relational brokenness as well. They were worn out. So they wrote this song. Listen to some of the lyrics. My prayers are wearing thin. I'm worn. Even before the day begins, I'm worn. I've lost my will to fight. I'm worn. Jesus' invitation in our text today is an invitation extended to those who are weary and worn out. It's an invitation to you and I. I think most of us would say, yes, I'm weary and worn out in some measure. It's an invitation to you and I. He also extends this invitation, notice, to all who are heavy laden or carrying heavy burdens. And most think this metaphorically refers to those who are carrying the extra weight put on them by the religious leaders through all these extra laws and all these extra things that they had to do. Look at Luke 11:46 as an example. Jesus said to them, "Woe also to you lawyers, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and yet you yourselves don't lift a finger to ease it." Talking about that, relating it to that, there's a weariness that comes from that. If we think that we have to, or if we think that we believe that keeping the rules is the same thing as knowing God, we'll get weary really quickly. That's what's happening with many. These religious leaders not only didn't practice what they preached, but they were only concerned about outward appearance. If you did this and that and what they said you should do. So the heavy laden here refers to, in part, those who are under the yoke of a do-it-yourself religion, who are under the yoke of this excessive kind of legalistic add-on rules that they're having to keep to make these religious leaders happy. And certainly that would create a weariness as well. And Jesus' invitation is to them too. Now that brings us to Jesus' actual invitation. It's from Jesus. It's for all who are weary and heavy laden, for those who are worn out. And here's his actual invitation. It's threefold. Jesus says, "Come to me." Jesus says, "Take up my yoke upon you." And Jesus says, "Learn from me." It's a threefold invitation that he gives, and he makes this promise twice in this invitation, that those who accept this invitation will find rest for their souls. There's a promise that comes with the invitation. Isn't that wonderful? That's part of what makes this such a gracious invitation, is that there's a promise with it. You'll find rest. You'll be given rest for your souls. Jesus says, "Come to me." I thought prayerfully about this part of the information, this invitation. I thought, well, what would come to my mind when I thought and prayed about this? And I tried to find it, and I couldn't. But there was an image that I used probably 10 years ago for the sermon series I did on Hosea. Paul Shinneman came up with it, and it was of a veiled figure, but you could see the person's arm extended like this, but with an open hand. "Come to me," Jesus said. I thought of that, an open hand, not a closed hand, but first you got to do this, this, and this. No, come to me, Jesus says. I thought of Matthew 18, where Jesus talks about how he wanted the children to come to him. The disciples wanted to shoo them away and say, rebuke them and get them out of here. But Jesus says, no. Well, let them come. Let them come. And he welcomes the children and he blesses them. And he prays for them and touches them. I thought of that. And then, Mac, if you'd show this picture, I thought of a message I received from someone I'll call Stacy. It's not a real name, but just to make this anonymous. She sent me this picture, and she sent me this message with the text message. She says, I'm in foreign territory and I don't know what to do. All I can do is pray. And she was dealing with relationship brokenness. She was in the midst of that, not knowing what to do. All I can do is pray. All I can do is pray, and that helps me. That gives me peace. The Lord gives me peace. And then she said, I often get this image of a culvert. And Jesus is in the culvert with me. And he's at the front entrance of the culvert. And he's the one looking out and seeing everything. And he sees everything. I can't see anything, but he sees everything, she says. And he tells me that I'm safe with him. And he sees all that's happening, and he says, there's a storm happening outside. There's a battle happening outside. I can't see it, but Jesus sees it, and he tells me everything's okay. I'm in the dark. I'm farther back in the culvert, she says. I can't see anything at all, but he assures me that I'm safe with him. To the weary and worn out, Jesus extends this invitation, even in the midst of the raging storms, and says, come to me, find rest. Come to me as a call to discipleship as well. That's evident from the next two parts of the invitation here. But come to me is also a call to discipleship, to follow after Jesus if we aren't. I spoke of the restlessness that we have in our hearts or in our spirits if we aren't in right relationship with the Lord. And I thought of that famous quote from Augustine in his Confessions. Here's what he says. You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. And Jesus promises rest in the place of that restlessness. He's promising peace with God if we would come to him. He's the one who reveals the Father. He's the one that we have to go to come to the Father. And Jesus says, come to me. It's the rest of peace with God. Then he says, take my yoke upon you. That's the second part of this invitation. And that might sound a little bit out of place or even confusing here. Take my yoke upon you. You just talked about rest. Why are you now talking about a yoke? That sounds like a burden. That sounds like hardship. How does that go along with rest? How can Jesus offer rest if part of the invitation is to take his yoke upon us? It ties in with what he says about taking up the cross as well. Same kind of language there in Matthew 16:24 and in Luke chapter 9. He says, take up your cross. If you want to follow me, take up your cross and follow me daily. He says, take up your cross daily. Same kind of language. But how does that go along with rest? How does that fit? Well, it certainly means that the promise isn't for an easy life, a problem-free life. But what Jesus does extend to us in this invitation is the promise of freedom in following after him. Roger Hahn explains it this way. The word was used in Judaism in a figurative way to signify submission, discipline, duty, and obedience, talking about the word yoke. However, it also spoke of freedom and life. Jews use the word yoke figuratively with reference to the law and the commandments. So to become a student of the oral law was to take upon oneself the yoke of the Torah. But Jesus' invitation was to discover the discipline and freedom that came from following him. Take up my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light, Jesus says. This directly ties in to the third aspect of this invitation, and that is, learn from me, Jesus says. This is about discipleship too. Disciples are supposed to not only learn from, but become like their masters. That's what Jesus is getting at here with this. It's not just for the sake of knowledge. This is for the sake of transformation. Disciples become like their teachers. The Message puts it this way: walk with me, work with me, watch how I do it. And follow in his steps. 1 John 2:5-6 talk about that if we say we walk with him, then we have to walk in his steps. Our lives have to look like his. That's what we mean by Christ-likeness, an aspect of holiness. In other words, we have everything to learn from Jesus. It's transformational learning. Not just book smarts, not just being able to rattle off this and that. This is transformational learning, that we're becoming more and more like Jesus. That's what discipleship is about. That's what this invitation is about, part of it. Learn from me, Jesus says. Now, some might say, well, I think I've learned enough. But the truth is, we never reach a place where we can say, well, I've learned so much. I think I'm done learning. I think I've learned everything there is to learn. Pastor Wayne calls that petrification. I'm not pronouncing that right. It means our hearts become hardened. It means that we get to this place where we're like, well, I'm done. I don't think I have anything left to learn. We become unteachable. We have an unteachable spirit. No, Jesus says, learn from me. And that's a lifelong journey and a blessing that we get to participate in. Some of the other translations pick up on the needed mindset then. The New Living Translation puts it, let me teach you, Jesus says. Or the Message puts it, keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Keep company with Jesus. That's how we learn. So what transformational learning has been happening in our lives? I wanted to tell you about Casey Bloom, who is one of the missionaries in Romania that we've been praying for and part of our partnership with the work there in Romania. She just got off a sabbatical March 31st, and she shared some of what she had been learning. She talked about how on her sabbatical, she kept different rhythms in her weeks then, that she was experiencing and being committed to Sabbath, resting and finding time with the Lord. And she said, you know what I've learned is that has to be a regular part of my rhythm of life when I get back from sabbatical. And so she says it's almost sounds silly, but I'm actually striving for a slower pace. Striving, it doesn't make sense, but you get what she's saying. She says, for me, this looks like practicing Sabbath each week, spending more time in the Bible, praying and journaling, not constantly filling my schedule with things to do. Casey is continuing to learn to come to Jesus for rest. And that is what's promised to those who will accept Jesus' invitation. Rest. That's what Jesus promises here. It is a gift Jesus wants to give us. Rest. Roger Hahn again clarifies the word rest here suggests renewal and refreshing. It does not promise that the burdens will go away. It does not promise that we will never again be weary, but it does promise renewal and refreshment in the difficult journey of life. Oh, thanks be to God for that. I was here last night asking the Lord to keep his promise to me. I need this rest. And this rest isn't a superficial rest. This is a deep rest. This is a restorative rest. This is a real rest that he wants to give you and me. But we have to accept the invitation. Rest is what he promises. It also picks up on Jeremiah 6:16 and verse 29. Jesus is picking up on that. That verse says, thus says the Lord, stand at the crossroads and look, ask for the ancient paths where the good way lies and walk in it and find rest for your souls. And most think that Jesus is saying this is now fulfilled in him because all the Old Testament scriptures point to him and we find that rest for our souls in Jesus. So Jesus gives us this invitation. Come to him. Take his yoke upon us. Learn from him. And will you hear this promise? You will receive rest for your souls. And he wants to give it to us. He's the one making the invitation. He's the one saying it. He's the one making the promise. He wants to give us rest for our souls in the difficult journey of life. And it is so difficult, isn't it? There's so many difficulties. So many things that we've even talked about this morning. And Jesus promises, even as the storm rages on, you can have this rest in your soul. As we sang this morning, it is well with my soul. That can actually be our testimony. That can actually be a reality. Jesus actually wants to do that in our lives. He says, will you accept this invitation? He has rest for us. The thing is about an invitation, though. You either accept it or you decline it. You either accept it or you decline it. I thought about some of the online things that you see. They give different options for an event that they're advertising. They put on there that you can click maybe to the invitation. They put on there you can click I'm interested. But really that's saying if we click those, if we choose that response, what we're really saying is it's not important enough to me to prioritize it. It's not important enough for me to rearrange my schedule. I might go, but then what happens later on after the event passes? We didn't go because all we said was maybe or not. I might be interested in it. No, Jesus' invitation, we either accept it or we decline it. And he wants so much for us to accept this invitation, to come to him and find rest for our souls. That's the invitation to us this morning. It's more important than a wedding invitation. It's more important, way more important than that or the junk mail invitations that we receive. It's more important than any invitation we see online for any kind of event being promoted. This is an invitation from Jesus. Here's another reason why this is such a gracious and important invitation. And if I would invite the musicians to come this morning. I told you about Julie and how she wrote on her wedding invitation to her parents, please pay for the dinner after the ceremony. Jesus and his invitation that he gives to us, on his invitation it says paid in full. Paid in full because Jesus Christ has made the way. He's the one who came to us before we can ever come to him. He's the one who took the initiative. He's the one who redeemed us. He's the one who showed us and revealed the Father. He's the one who came to declare the love of God in his work, in his ministry, in his teachings, but especially on the cross. And so this morning, we're going to come to the table today and celebrate that. Such a gracious invitation.